I see a ton of people have joined in. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessie, and I will be helping moderate this webinar for you today. We will have about 20 minutes at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So if you have any questions during any time of this webinar, please make sure you input them into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, not the chat tab, the Q&A, so that Dr. Marinelli will have time to answer your questions at the end. Our topic for the day today is unlocking your potential expert tips for a standout med school application, hosted by Dr. Renee Marinelli. Just to give you guys a little bit of background on Dr. Marinelli, she is the Director of Advising here at MedSchoolCoach. She has practiced family medicine, served on the University of California Admissions Committee, and has helped hundreds of students get into medical school. Currently, she also spearheads the team of physician advisors who guide med school students in their application process. So without further ado, I'll let you take it away from here, Dr. Marinelli.
Thanks, Jessie. Hi, everyone out there. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Hopefully we can give you some good information on applying to medical school and getting you some tips and tricks and just going through the process on how you can really make sure that you're successful. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We got a bit of a slideshow. It shouldn't go too long. And then after that, I would really love to, as Jessie said, talk a lot about the questions that come up. I think the Q&A is probably one of the most helpful parts of this, is getting to answer some of your specific questions as they relate to either applying or just being a physician in general, whatever it may be. We'll try to get those answered, as many as we possibly can. So it's a couple minutes after the hour, so let's go ahead and get started and just dive right in. So those of you who are just joining, again, I'm Dr. Renee Marinelli. I'm currently the Director of Advising at MedSchoolCoach. And so I've worked with MedSchoolCoach now for over 8 years, have seen thousands of applicants come through and reviewed thousands of applications, and really have worked through all different types of students and their situations. So I've really had a lot of experience now in kind of understanding who each applicant is and how to work with them through their specific situation. So let's get started. So before we dive in, I just want to say, we're going to cover a lot in this webinar, but everything really lives here. This is our guidebook to becoming a physician. It's super comprehensive. We've added to it every year. We've modified it. We've updated it. There's been a lot of changes in medical school admissions. So it's something that we're continually changing and modifying and adding to. So I definitely recommend that you download this guidebook. It serves as a great resource no matter what stage you're in. So let's talk first about a little bit about admission stats. So for those of you who are familiar with applying to medical school, you know that getting into medical school is super competitive, and that starts with your stats. So your GPA and your MCAT, and we try to look at all these other things that applicants bring to the table. Their extracurricular activities, research, things like that are going to really help shape an applicant. And we'll talk about those as well in this webinar, but really the stats are kind of the thing that's going to get your foot in the door initially. So let's talk about what those stats look like. So this is a great grid, and I use this all the time to talk to applicants. So I think if you wanted to kind of put yourself here and understand what your acceptance rate is based on your stats or probability of acceptance, we can kind of extrapolate. So basically, this is all of the applicants that applied over several years, what their GPA range was and what their MCAT range was, and then what their acceptance rate was given those students. So let's look at somebody who has a 510 MCAT, which is kind of on the average, about 511 is average for somebody matriculating into medical school. So let's look at a 511 MCAT and 3.7 GPA. So we're in this grid and fall over here. Over 8,000 people had that stat, and about 56.7% of them got accepted to medical school. So that's a decent place to start. Overall, the acceptance rate to medical school is about 40%. So, this is slightly higher than the average acceptance rate. It's around 40%. We really, really like this number higher. So as we're talking to applicants and you're thinking about your own application, think about what you can do to kind of put yourself in a different bracket. So for this applicant, if they, boosted up their MCAT score and got over here, they got about a 65% chance if they got a 515 or something. If that same applicant decides to do a post-bac or something like that and gets their GPA up higher, they got about a 66% chance. So very similar stats there, but you can kind of understand and play with the numbers a little bit to see where you're at specifically. And then what are some of the things that you can do in order to just to increase those raw chances of getting into medical school based on your stats alone. So this is kind of, I think, a good opener of just saying, hey, this is what I'm looking at. I'm looking at this GPA, I'm looking at this MCAT. What are my chances based on that? If your chances base is less than, 50%, you're gonna struggle. It's gonna be a tough cycle for you. It's not impossible, obviously, but we really like to see these stats a bit higher if possible when we're getting started with students so that they just have the best chance possible to get in. So outside of your stats, then how do you really make sure that you have a successful application, which is, the rest of this talk. And these are kind of the modifiable variables, that you can really change easily. Whereas a GPA and MCAT are kind of tough to change. A GPA, especially because you've established it over multiple years, and MCAT, because some people, even though they prepare and they try really hard, their test taking ability for standardized tests are just not as high as some other people. So I've seen plenty of applicants that have taken the MCAT multiple times and maybe land somewhere around a 506, 507. And that's really as far as they can go. Which doesn't mean they can't get in, but it does mean that they're going to have to do some other things to really make sure they're competitive. So there's other areas of your application that you can really, really work on and hone in on to make sure that you're successful, in addition to that GPA and MCAT. I see a lot of great Q&A questions coming in, which is great. So please keep dropping those in there. I'll try to get to as many of them as I can after the presentation, and hopefully we'll only go to like 30 or 40 so minutes on the presentation, and then we'll have a lot of time to answer questions at the end. So please keep typing those in. Thank you. So these are kind of the outline of things we need to do in order to be successful. So let's talk about each one specifically. So this is kind of a old cheesy graphic that I made years ago, but it still stands true, is really getting your application ready. And this is kind of a glimpse of the entire application process. So if you look, we are here. So in January to April, we're in March. Oops, sorry about that. So this is kind of where people that are going to apply, this is where they're starting, it's really starting in that late winter of the year. So in January through April is kind of where I start saying, okay, people, let's get ready. Let's start thinking about these things. We're going to start with taking the MCAT and requesting letters of recommendation. May through June is when you're going to take the MCAT if you haven't already. And this is where the bulk of the application stuff happens. I'll go through specific dates at the next slide, but you're going to be getting your AMCAS application ready, which for those of you who don't know, the AMCAS application is the centralized application server for all US MD schools except for Texas. But pretty much anybody that's a United States applicant is going to complete AMCAS. And just for the sake of clarity and making it a little bit easier to follow and understand, we're just going to be talking really about AMCAS in this webinar, but there are other applications like Texas and DO school applications as well. But again, we're going to kind of focus on MCAS because that's really what most people use. So you're going to submit that primary application to every school you're applying to in the end of May or early June. And then after that, you have a little bit of a lag time, and then schools will start sending you secondary applications. Secondary applications are individual applications from each school that you applied to. There is some screening that occurs for those secondary applications, but it's pretty minor. So you can expect a secondary application to almost every school that you have submitted a primary application to. And so that happens during the summer. Then on late summer and then early fall, that's when interview invites start coming. So a lot of interviews now are virtual. There's still some that are in person, but the interview season really lasts from August, September, all the way. We're starting here all the way to like May or June of the following year. And so that's when you hopefully will get some admissions decisions, and then you start medical school like in July of August of the following year. So the whole process is about a year and a half in length. It takes a long time. So this is where I really, really recommend that kind of preparing and planning. Know ahead of time what each step is and what you need to anticipate next, what do you need to get ready, and what do you need to start thinking about, because this is really going to help you be successful. So knowing key dates is so important because most schools use something called rolling admissions, meaning that they will start reviewing applications as soon as they receive them. So that basically means if you can imagine a stack of applications, you know, thousands upon thousands of applications, most of it's digital now, but you could imagine like a physical stack of papers, and they have thousands to go through. You want to be at the top of the pile, because if they're going to start saying, hey, yeah, this person looks good, you want to be up here so your chances are higher that you get moved to the next stage, which is usually the interview invite. So that basically means you want to submit your primary application as early as possible, and your secondary applications as close to when you receive them as possible. So these are the kind of key dates. These change every year a little bit, so I didn't even bother updating this slide just because it's usually a day or two off. This is the AMCAS application like we talked about. So it opens in the beginning of May. That means you can actually log in, make an account, start completing information in there. You can't submit until the end of May or early June. Again, that date changes each year. And then AO COMAS is the DO application, and TMDSIS is the Texas application. So again, this is so important, anticipating when that AMCAS application is going to open up. You want to be able to log into AMCAS the day one that it opens up and start putting in your biographical information, start putting in your coursework. That's where you're actually going to do a letter of request form too. So if you have letter writers that are sending it to AMCAS, you're going to download it from there and send it to the letter writers. So there's a lot of steps that really, really involve AMCAS, and you should get started day one as soon as you're allowed to. So extracurricular activities, again, kind of another more easily modifiable variable to your application. You know, these are going to be kind of the fluff to your application. You have your GPA, you have your MCAT, but what else is about you? What else have you done? These here are really kind of the standard, if you will, activities that almost every pre-med has. And there's not a lot of good data to say how many hours or that type of thing. And we can talk about that a little bit at the end, but these are kind of the categories that you want to have. Notice that clinical work and community service are different. And lots of times people, what they do for their clinical work or patient work is that they volunteer in the hospital, and that's great. But if that's going to be your clinical work, you're going to want to have a volunteer experience as well. So volunteering is really trying to be altruistic, giving your time to other people without necessarily getting something in return. So that's really where community service / volunteer work comes into play. So, you know, since almost every applicant has these types of extracurricular activities, and how do your activities really going to differentiate you between, you know, from all of those thousands of applicants? And so that's kind of what I have up here is make sure that the activity is longitudinal as much as possible. And what I mean by that is the best activities are ones that you started and then dedicated a lot of time to. You know, it doesn't look as strong if you do a month of research in one lab and then a month of research in another lab. And, you know, overall, maybe you have 300 hours, but you've kind of had piecemeal of different things. Whereas if you had 2 years in one lab where you developed a project, you did the study, then analyzed the results, and then had a poster or publication or something like that, that activity is going to stand out much, much more than kind of the piecemeal of activities. Activities that have a leadership role, especially ones that, and what I mean, because leadership is down here, is really the evolution of that activity, where maybe you started as a volunteer in an activity, and you spent a lot of time there, and then you became the volunteer coordinator. So you started as just a member, but then you put so much time and effort into it that role grew into something even greater, and now you're a leader in that activity. That's a great way to show your depth, your commitment, and kind of that leadership potential too, that all doctors really need to have. An original idea, I think, is can be really tough to come up with, but this is something that really, really sets people apart. And so what I've seen some applicants do is maybe they've started a nonprofit. I saw one applicant during COVID that started an online website that only shared like evidence-based known COVID guidance and information. So this was kind of something that, these are kind of activities that somebody is developing themselves, maybe thinking of themselves or with another person or a partner, and then developing and turning it into something. I mean, those can be a bit more rare. That's hard to do. But if you have something like that, it really, really shows kind of your initiative, again, your drive, your motivation, your ability to come up with something like that and then see it through is pretty remarkable for medical schools. And then other things to set yourself apart are international activities. A lot of pre-meds do international activities, but outside of like study abroad, I mean more international work like community service or clinical work. So if you can work in a clinic, if you can work in a medical setting, if you can do some type of community service, I mean, even if it's unrelated to medicine, like maybe you're building, sustainable water solutions, that can still be a really great activity to add to your application. So extracurricular activities, super important. We can literally spend a whole webinar on this alone, but that kind of hopefully gives you a little bit of an overview of what you want to have on your application and how to make those stand out a bit more. So the personal statement, I think probably everybody knows about the personal statement. Probably everybody dreads writing it, but it is a very important part of your application. And just as I said, we could have a whole webinar on extracurricular activities. We could also have a whole webinar on the personal statement, because it does require a lot of thought, a lot of preparation, and just a lot of guidance and skill and modification and going back to the drawing board and changing it and editing it and help to get a really, really good personal statement on paper. So it is something you do want to take very seriously. And the personal statement is a component of the AMCAS application. So you write one personal statement and then every school you apply to receives it. So you want it to be one appealing across the board. Like, you're not going to say, I want to go to UCSD specifically because this is being sent to other medical schools. So you want to make it across the board applicable to every school you apply to, and you want to make it interesting. I always think of, again, that stack of applications. If we can imagine that, if you are an admissions committee member and you're like, okay, I got like 1,000 applicants that came in today, I need to go through them. If you're looking at their personal statement and you're reading through the first couple of sentences, if those don't catch your eye and make you interested, you might say, okay, I'm going to skim the rest and then just toss it aside. You don't want to be that person. You want to be the person where the admissions committee member, even after a long day and a stack of applications, starts reading your personal statement and is like, huh, this is pretty interesting. I want to read this whole thing. I want to find out more about this applicant. That's the one you want to be. And so my tips for the personal statement are: start early, get help from other people, and edit and think about it, and really, try to hone in what you want to say. And the key there is starting early. I've seen too many applicants that start in May, writing their personal statement. And then by the time that they can submit at the end of May, they're like, I'm not quite ready. I'm still having so-and-so look at it. So start early. And that would mean if you're applying this year, I would have absolutely start now. This is a great time to start getting some ideas on paper, maybe even making an outline. Just start. The other thing too, is you really want to get feedback on your personal statement, but there is a problem of too many cooks in the kitchen. And so what I recommend, and not to just put in a plug at MedSchoolCoach, but I really recommend having like an advisor or somebody that knows what a medical school personal statement should be like, give you critiques on your personal statement. I've seen way too many applicants that, ask their uncle who's a doctor, but he's never been on an admissions committee, or ask their friend to read it, or ask, the writing center at their university. Not that there's anything wrong with those getting input and, from those people and what they know. It's just they don't have that expertise of what a medical school admissions committee is looking for on the personal statement. So I really recommend getting that expert advice, somebody who has not only written a personal statement, but have sat on the other side and reviewed those thousands of them to really determine what makes them unique and what's going to make the best personal statement. Again, we could spend a lot of time here, but I think for right now, I'll kind of move through so that we can have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So going back to that cheesy graphic that I made years ago, with the flow chart of, okay, we get our primary ready and then we submit it, and then there's secondaries. So once you submit your primary application, the AMCAS application server will take a couple weeks to verify it, and they're looking to make sure you entered your grades correctly and things like that. And that is a really great time for you to start preparing your secondaries. So again, the secondaries are these individual requests from each school, and they usually have a cost associated with them, around like $100 each school. And then they usually have a series of essay questions. And this can be like 2 to 8 essay questions, really just depends on the school. But each, like I said, you can expect a secondary from almost every school that you applied to. So if you can say, let's say on average, there's 5 essay questions. Each essay question is 3 paragraphs in length. That's a lot of writing that you're going to have to do if you apply to 30 schools. So the best way to do this is to start preparing early, prepare before you receive the secondaries. And the nice thing is most schools reuse their prompts from the previous year for the next year. They rarely change from year to year. So you can kind of look up, what was UC Irvine's prompt from 2023 to 2024, and start preparing your response, your essay to those questions, because more than likely they're going to be the same in the 2024, 2025 application cycle. So I recommend trying to prepare these as early as possible. And then the great thing that happens is when a school sends you a secondary, you again want to turn that around as quickly as possible because of those rolling admissions. So if you get a secondary and you already have your prepared response, all you have to do really is make sure that nothing changed, copy and paste, do a quick run over to make sure there's no errors, and then submit. And that could take an hour. Whereas if you haven't prepared, you could receive 1 secondary in a week, you could receive 10. And those people that receive 10, which absolutely will happen, they are just over inundated in writing essays. And so they maybe won't turn their secondary applications around for a couple weeks, 3-4 weeks, a month. You don't want to be that person, because 1, that doesn't show that you're very interested in that school if it takes you a month to respond to their secondary request. And number 2, you're already putting yourself lower in that pile of applicants, because your application is not going to be considered complete until you have that secondary completed. So again, this is just something to be thinking about, get ahead of, and make sure that you can start preparing these earlier. The great news too, is that it sounds daunting, and it is. It's not an easy process, but a lot of the secondaries are pretty similar. And what that means is after like 5 or 10 secondaries, you're going to start seeing, hey, these prompts or these questions are very similar from this school to this school. A lot of schools are going to ask about like a diversity question. A lot of them are going to ask about, why do you want to come to this school? What are some of the other ones? what challenge have you overcome? So there's a lot of questions that are very similar between school to school. So what you can do is after you start writing around 5 to 10, you can kind of take what you've written, modify it a little bit, and then repackage it for another school. So it does get easier as you go through it, but initially it can be pretty overwhelming for students. So that's why, again, that preparation piece is key. So I threw this up here because I feel like virtual assessments, and I'll go into what that means, really sneaks up on people. So I always want to give them a heads up. So in the last few years, a lot of medical schools have started asking students to complete various online exams. So the most common one is Casper, which is offered through Altus Insights. Altus also has Duet. There's a Kira interview, which is kind of just a one-way interview where you're recording your responses. And then there's Preview, which is offered through the AMC in a collaboration with various schools. Again, these can really sneak up on people. So what I like to do is just say, keep your eye out for schools that are going to require Casper and know which schools are going to require that ahead of time. And then plan on completing Casper sometime around secondary season. I kind of imagine it as like a secondary. So maybe once you submit your primary application, log on, go and select the schools that require Casper and then take the Casper exam. The good thing is there's Casper date, like you can take the exam pretty much at your own time. So it's not like something that like, oh shoot, like I need to go be in a certain location for the MCAT. No, it's a virtual exam. You take it at home. For Preview, on the other hand, which is probably the second most required one, that is something you actually receive an invitation from a school to take. So not something you need to track as much, but you still need to prepare for these tests and have an idea of what they're going to be asking. These aren't like the MCAT where you need months and months of studying, but it is something you want to take some time to prepare. So again, I'm not going to go into depth here because these tests are, I think, kind of just another hoop that medical schools have put out there for students to jump into. But it's just something that you really need to be just tracking, thinking about, and knowing that this is probably something I'm going to have to do. And don't forget about it so that, you're in August and the school's like, where's your Casper score? And you're like, oh, shoot, I forgot to take it, or I didn't know I had to take it. So just kind of keep an eye out for those. So finally, after your primary, after your secondaries, after your Casper exam, schools will start to review your entire application and determine, hey, this person looks great on paper. Well, let's now talk to them and see who they are as a person. And so that's where your actual interview comes in, where either you'll go to the medical school or you'll do a virtual interview. The interview is just so important because I really think of it as, again, they like you on paper. They think you could be a good medical student at the school, but now they want to just see how you interact. Are you personable? Are you able to have a conversation? Are you somebody that a patient would be able to relate to? Are you somebody that they feel like they could have you as a colleague? Because that's really what it is. Like, you're going to be interviewed by peers and you're going to be interviewed by physicians that work with medical students. So they want to see, is this somebody that I could interact with and I want to interact with? And so it's so important to really demonstrate that to them, shine, be personable, be outgoing, and nail that interview. This is kind of, again, that last stage of the process. And so you've gone this far, having a great interview can really push you over the edge to an acceptance. And whereas having a bad interview can easily just result in a rejection. So it's just so, so important. Again, this is such a big step that we have entire webinars on the interview alone. This webinar is giving you kind of just overall tips, tricks, things to be looking for your application. So again, I'm not going to go into more details here, but we certainly have more information about the interview process, what to expect, how to prepare, all of that. So, keep that in mind, that when that time comes, you're going to want to spend a lot of time here. All right, so we talked about all of these things. So really now it's about bringing it all together, getting your grades, your MCAT, those extracurricular activities, your narrative, who you are in that personal statement, and continuing that through the secondary applications, putting that all together and then getting that interview. And then that's really what those medical school admissions committees are going to evaluate you on, is this whole package, all of these different things that you've contributed to, and they're going to determine whether or not they want to admit you to their school. There's a lot of steps here. There's a lot of things to be thinking about. Again, going back to that graphic, you want to just kind of take one piece at a time, but know what's coming next, and making sure that you're planning for it and you're preparing each step appropriately at the right time and in the right way to make sure that you're successful. So that's the end of my presentation. So I'm going to jump into the Q&A in just a minute, but just a little bit about MedSchoolCoach. This is Dr. Sahil Mehta down here. He founded MedSchoolCoach, gosh, over 10 years ago, well over 10 years ago, because he was a medical student at the time and he was on the admissions committee, and his friends were like asking him questions and stuff about their application. And he just kept seeing people like making these mistakes of not having a strong personal statement, applying late, not having a great school list, all of these things that he was like, man, I can help these people so much by just giving them these other tips, having them, write a better personal statement, having them retake their MCAT if it's not strong enough, but basically just guiding people towards success. And so he started this kind of just, again, as a medical student, like, I'm going to just try to help people. And it's just grown. And now, as Jesse said, we've helped thousands of applicants get into medical school. And that's what we do, is we have been through the process before. So everybody you work with is a physician advisor. So it's somebody that's applied to medical school themselves, and then been on the opposite side, that's sitting on admissions committees and reviewing applications. So we've done it ourselves, and now we've reviewed what it takes for students to get in. And those are the people you'll be working with to really help ensure success of your application and keep you accountable and on top of every step along the way. So definitely think about working with us. I think, we provide such a great service. It's so helpful to have somebody that kind of can mentor you and guide you and just make sure you're really putting your best foot forward, or the best foot forward at every step. So without further ado, let's talk about the Q&A. Let's go through the Q&A session. If you want to book a meeting with us and get more information, just scan this QR code. I think Jesse can drop the chat or the link in the chat as well, where you can book a meeting with one of our enrollment managers and learn a little bit more about MedSchoolCoach and how we can help you in your situation specifically. So let me just stop sharing my screen here, and then I will dive right into the Q&A. Hopefully I'll get to as many questions as possible. But of course, if you have other questions that I'm not able to get to, you can certainly reach out to us at any time. So somebody asked specifically, how do non-traditional experiences look to admissions committees? And they were specifically referring to military service, but I think that this is just kind of a great thing to bring up no matter what kind of non-traditional experience is. So, just to everybody out there. So a traditional applicant is somebody that applies straight from undergrad and then matriculates into medical school. A non-traditional applicant is somebody that maybe served in the military after undergrad, or served in the military before and went to undergrad and then applied, or maybe they finished undergrad and then they decided to go and work somewhere for several years, or maybe they had a couple different careers. I mean, there's all different kinds of non-traditional applicants. But I always get this question of, how are non-traditional people viewed? And I think they can be viewed very, very positively. This is somebody that maybe has some other life experience outside of undergrad. Maybe they did an alternative career. Maybe they served in the military. There's all kinds of great skills and perspective that could be learned from having a non-traditional background. So I think they can be, again, viewed very favorably. The key for non-traditional applicants is how do you leverage that on your application? How do you present it? Especially for people that are changing careers. I've seen lots of people that, are applying to medical school that maybe had a full career and now they're applying to medical school. And I think that's where kind of some nuance is needed, where you need to say how much this other career has really given you strengths and abilities, but then also kind of essentially convince medical schools that you want to go to medical school and you want to commit to this next stage in your life in these next several years. So there's some finesse there and some nuance. So again, non-traditional applicants, great, but making sure that you're presenting it appropriately on your application is super important. Somebody asked about is like, what's the latest I can take my MCAT? They said specifically in August. So because of those rolling admissions, schools aren't going to really consider your application complete until you have that MCAT score. And it's really important that you try to have that in as soon as possible. Ideally, you want to have that MCAT score in when you're submitting your primary application so that you can know where you're competitive at, know where, what your score is like and which schools to apply to. Then you hit submit and, they can process your application and send you a secondary and there's no delay there. There is a bit of a strategy that if you are like you're taking your MCAT in May and your score doesn't come out till June, you can submit to one school. And during that verification process, wait for your MCAT. And then your MCAT comes out in, let's say the mid to end of June. And then your application's verified, and then you can use that score to determine your competitiveness and add to more schools than just applying to that one. And your application at that point is not really that delayed because you had that verification process. So that's a strategy you can use if you need that extra study time. But outside of that, I really don't recommend people taking their MCAT really later than June if they're going to apply that cycle. It delays things, and that is just such an easy way to kind of put you at the bottom of that stack, as if you're just delayed on your MCAT. So if it really depends on the circumstance, but oftentimes if somebody needs that extra time to study, I'll recommend that they don't apply that year and take extra time to study and take the MCAT, in January, because they have a whole year to apply. There's nuance here and it's worth a discussion with an advisor or somebody that knows about it, but usually is kind of like anything later than June is kind of where I use the cutoff of probably shouldn't take the MCAT if it's going to be that late. So somebody asked about a postbac if they have a GPA of a 3.6. So, or do you just take other classes? So that's a great question. And we'll talk a little bit about like postbacs versus special masters. So just a couple minutes there. So a postbac is basically taking undergrad courses. You can do that at your institution. You can do it through other institutions. You can do a formal postbac program where like a school will say, here are the courses you need to complete, or you can do what we call like a DIY postbac, where basically you're kind of making it up as you go. A postbac can be really good for an applicant with a GPA that's kind of right on that cusp of competitiveness. So this person who asked the question said a 3.6. That's like somebody that a postbac probably could be really good, because you don't need a lot of undergrad courses to push that overall GPA up to maybe a 3.7, 3.75 in order to be in that more competitive bracket. In addition, like if there were specific prerequisite courses or areas where maybe you just weren't as strong. So let's say, you took chemistry and you got a C in chemistry and that really brought your GPA down. You could retake that chemistry course and it will boost your GPA, but then it's also going to show medical schools your really true academic ability in a course like that. So there's again more nuance here. I hate to say that, but it's not just a blanket, yes, a post-bac for somebody with a 3.6, a special master's for somebody else. But that's kind of typically the applicant that I would recommend a post-bac for. A master's program or a special master's program, those are usually reserved for people that have a very low undergrad GPA, and they're just not going to be able to add in a bunch of undergrad courses to really make that up. And so the master's program, when you actually look at AMCAS, that's going to show up on a separate line on AMCAS. So you're going to have all your GPAs, you're going to have your undergrad GPA, and then you'll have your graduate level GPA. And that's where that master's will show up. And so let's say somebody, didn't know what they wanted to do, and they didn't really have a great track record in undergrad, and they applied with a 3.1 total undergrad GPA, but they decided, yeah, I want to go into medical school, so I'm going to do this special master's program that's geared towards students that are applying to medical school, and now I got a 4.0. So medical schools will see that lower undergrad GPA, but then they're going to see that really great master's GPA. And so it kind of gives a clean slate in a way to evaluate an application, is like, hey, they didn't do too good in undergrad, but look at how well they did in this rigorous master's program. This is somebody that probably has the academic capability to do well in medical school. So that's kind of my 2-3 minute spiel on post-bacs and special masters. Again, there's a ton of nuance there. So if you are thinking about one of those programs, again, I'd recommend talking to somebody that knows, because I think it's really, really worthwhile to make a decision, a good decision and an informed decision on which program is going to be the best for your specific situation, rather than going and spending 2 years and $60,000 on a master's program, and maybe that one's the best thing for your application. So definitely something to, get some feedback on. So a couple people, asked about letters of recommendation and kind of like what the process is like. And so let me just kind of talk that through a little bit. So I recommended asking for letters of recommendation like in February or March of the year you're applying. And lots of times people are like, that is so early. But the reason is because professors specifically get tons and tons of letter recommendation requests. And so you want to be one on the early side, so they are fresh and gung-ho about writing letters and not burnt out after they've written hundreds of letters. And number two, you want to give them ample time to get it in. And then finally, you want to make sure to have some type of leeway. So if it's a professor that drops the ball and doesn't complete the letter of recommendation, and you were depending on that one and you didn't ask until May, and now you're like, shoot, I don't have that letter of recommendation. How am I going to get one? You don't want to be in that boat. You want to know early on, hey, I have these letters, they're ready to go, and I can depend on those ones being there. So if you ask for them early and the professor says, great, I'll have it to you by March 31st, then what do you do? Because the application doesn't open until May. You can't send it there till May. You can use a third-party letter service. Usually we recommend interfolio.com. And basically that's a letter holder service. And what they'll do is that the professor writer can write that letter recommendation, send it to Interfolio. It sits there until you're ready to send it to AMCAS. And so once it's in Interfolio, you can designate where it goes and you can have control over the letter. So this is great not only for those early letters, but this is also really great for those applicants that are applying to multiple application servers. So like if you are applying to Texas schools and AMCAS application, the non-Texas schools, then you can have your letter writer submit one letter to Interfolio, and then you can distribute it to AMCAS in Texas. Just makes it easier for the letter writer. And for somebody like me, I just like to have control. I like to know the letter is there, and then I can just add it to AMCAS as soon as it opens. It makes just it takes a lot of the guessing out, and a lot of the variables out, and again, makes it easier on your professors. So I really recommend trying to do that. So let's see. Trying to lump some of these questions together, since a lot of them are very similar. So let me just take a look and see if there's other ones I can kind of lump together. So let's talk a little bit. There's some questions about extracurriculars and kind of like your time frame and how you're going to put those into the application. And so one of the most common questions, and there is a question here about that, is how many hours should I spend in each extracurricular activity? As I mentioned during the presentation, there's not a ton of good data on that. There's really one old study that, or old data that was released from like the University of Utah, but I feel like that is dated quite a bit. So what we've kind of do is look anecdotally as the applicants that come through MedSchoolCoach and the ones that get accepted. And usually what I will say is at a minimum, you need about 200 hours of research, 200 hours of clinical work, 200 hours of community service or volunteer work. And then you're going to need like 1 to 2 leadership activities. And I feel like I'm forgetting one right now, but that's kind of at a minimum is around 200 from each one of those categories. Any more than that is going to look really great, but I think, that's kind of where you want to start. Oh, shadowing. I usually say about 50 to 100 hours of shadowing. 200 hours of shadowing is really, really tough to get. So somewhere around 50 to 100 is where I see most applicants being successful. Some of the questions were about like, how do you actually talk about those activities on your AMCAS application? And so the AMCAS application has an activities section where you're able to include 15 activities. And so if you're somebody that has, you've done like 25 things, you got to narrow it down to 15. And you want those 15 to be the most applicable to medical school, the ones that were the most meaningful and impactful for you, and the ones that are going to be like kind of checking off those boxes, so to speak. So, if you have 25 activities, you don't want to forget about putting your research in there because that's important for medical school admissions. So when you're completing it, you're putting in those 15 and you're going to talk a little bit about what you did in that activity. Why was it particularly impactful, what you learned, etc. If you have more than 15, there are some strategic ways to kind of make sure that you put only 15. You can combine some activities if they overlap. If you have like multiple publications, you could combine that into one entry and say, publications, and then list the citation for each one. I've definitely seen people make only one list of like Dean's List awards or one entry for Dean's List awards, which is absolutely true. You don't want to have multiple entries for like a Dean's List in, fall of 2023 and a Dean's List in spring of 2025. Like you don't need that. Just put them under one entry. So there's definitely strategic ways in order to enter those onto your application to make them streamline, stand out, and just to kind of prioritize how you want to emphasize different activities. Somebody asked does it look bad if I have a few prerequisites not completed by the time I'm applying? And that's a great question. No, it doesn't look bad because you can indicate on your AMCAS application that you have planned courses. And what you would do is you would update schools like with a letter afterwards saying, I completed biostats and I got an A in biostats. Ideally, you'd like to have those courses completed so that they can see how well you did in them, but it doesn't necessarily impact you in a super negative sense to have, biostats planned for the semester that you're applying. That's pretty common. The big key here though is making sure that you have the appropriate prerequisites done before taking the MCAT. And so that's kind of where I get a little concerned if people aren't having their prereqs done, is like, well, did you get your year of OChem? Did you get your year of physics? Because all of that stuff is going to be on the MCAT. And if you don't have that baseline level of understanding, it's going to be really, really tough to study effectively for the MCAT. So that's kind of the one caveat I have to answer that question. This is a really great question, is does it matter what type of research for medical school admissions? And I will say kind of, but not really. So medical schools do want to see that you have some skills and kind of those traditional bench work research projects. They want to make sure you can use a pipette and understand, sterile technique and things like that. And so it can be really helpful to have a bench work clinical research or research project. But most importantly is medical schools want to see through your research that you understand the scientific process, you understand how to develop a hypothesis, develop a project, work through the project and analyze results. And so if that's not necessarily in like a wet lab type of setting, that can be okay as well. I usually try to say do a science-based research project before jumping into something that's not science. So like some people will come to me and be like, I have a sociology research project. That's great, but I think you should also, ideally have some type of other research as well that's more science-based. So you definitely can have outside of, traditional lab science research, but those are kind of the requisites you want to have on your application as well, because you want to show them that you have that experience and understanding in the sciences. So we're coming up to, the top of the hour here. So I'm going to try to get to a few more questions. There's so many great questions out here. I'm just like looking at all of them and I just want to say, wow, that's a good question. Wow, that's great. But I can't get to everybody. There's just too many, but thank you so much for contributing and, asking this many questions. That's why I'm trying to combine them so I can answer as many as I can. But if I don't get to your question, please reach out to us at MedSchoolCoach. Like we've seen these questions before. We've seen situations so similar before. So please feel free to reach out and talk with us and we can certainly get you, in the right direction here. Let me see. Let's try to get some ones that are overlapping. So a couple of people asked about international applicants. So it sounds like we have maybe a couple people who are either international or Canadian. So it is tough to get an acceptance to a US medical school if you're not a citizen here. I would absolutely recommend getting expert guidance if you're not a citizen to the United States, because there's only certain schools that even accept citizens and non-citizens, and the acceptance rate is quite low. So you really want to make sure your application is as maximized as possible to have the best chance. Typically international students are going to need pretty high GPAs, pretty high MCAT in order to be competitive. And then it's really about applying to the right schools. And then also like making sure every little step on your application, as I talked about in that presentation, is put together correctly, just to maximize your chances, because it is so tough. But I recommend reaching out to us because again, it's a bit of an uphill battle if you are an international applicant. Not impossible at all, but really somebody that needs to focus on getting all of your ducks in a row. This is a great question that I like to talk about. So does the reputation of your undergrad school make a big difference in your medical school application? And the answer there is simply no. It's kind of this misconception that you have to go to a really premier or well-known Ivy League undergrad in order to get into medical school. And that's just not true. I went to a really small state school that not anybody really even knew about. And there were two of us that had actually graduated the same year from that state school at UC Irvine in medical school. The biggest determination of getting into medical school is how well you're doing and how well you're performing and putting that application together. your undergrad, the caliber of your undergrad can maybe help a little tiny bit, but it's not going to make the big difference here. So I always give this example of, if you could imagine there's two applicants, and one applicant has a 4.0 and a 518 GPA or MCAT, and they went to a state school, and the other applicant has a 3.6 and a 510 MCAT, and they went to Harvard. That person that went to the state school with the higher stats, they're gonna get in. Let's say now you have two applicants that have the exact same stats and they look almost the exact same. Maybe that Harvard is gonna give that person a little tiny bit of a leg up, and they might get the acceptance over somebody from a state school, with all other things considered. But it's really the performance in undergrad and your application that's going to determine if you get accepted, not the name or the tier, or if your undergrad was an Ivy League or not. Well, maybe let's see if we can do like another couple questions, or maybe like one more question out there that looks like it could just be burning. I saw a couple questions here about working as a CNA or an EMT to get clinical experience, and that is a great way to get clinical experience. It can be really tough for undergrads to get like in-depth clinical experience or patient interaction, because you don't have training in order to care for patients. So I do see quite a few applicants either get their EMT license or their nursing assistant license, which is usually only a few months coursework. And that can kind of let you be a little bit more interactive with patients and the healthcare staff, because you have a license behind you and you have extra training. So that's definitely something to consider if you're struggling to get that clinical experience. Or if you're getting some like volunteer experience, but you're not getting to really interact with patients. There's plenty of people that volunteer in the hospital that go and, file charts or something like that. That's great, you're volunteering, but you're not really actually interacting with patients or healthcare staff. So if you're struggling to find that, definitely look at those options of getting a bit more training so that you can have more hands-on participation in patient care. So with that, I'm gonna wrap up. I'm gonna go eat dinner. I'm over in Colorado, so I feel like my stomach is growling right now since it's about 6 o'clock. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. I hope this provided you some information on, how to get into medical school and what are the things to be thinking about. Again, there are so many wonderful questions out there, and I apologize that we just don't have time to get to all of them. So reach out to us at MedSchoolCoach. Download that guidebook, look at our resources. We have a ton of great resources on MedSchoolCoach.com and our sister website, prospectivedoctor.com. There's so many free resources there, tons and tons of different webinars, podcasts, things like that. So check us out. We've got a lot of information, and we are here to help you get into medical school and be successful and become our future colleagues. So with that, thank you guys so much for joining. Have a great night, and hopefully we get to work with you soon. Okay, good night.